We are in Ezekiel tonight, and you've got these notes. If you need notes, Tony's got some notes there for you. One's just that we've gone through this one several times with the map of Gog and Magog invasion. And then in this chapter here, in Ezekiel, the chapter we're actually looking at tonight, looking forward to at least, is chapter 37. And if you look at chapter 37, so that's chapter 37 and 38 is what we did last week. If you look at chapter 42 or 43, that's where the glory returns. And so what we have in Ezekiel, if we accept it this way, and it's something the way we're approaching it, is beginning in chapter 37, you've got the Valley of Dry Bones, Israel coming back. That's the return at the end of time. It's not the Babylonian return from exile. It's not 1948. You can consider that. But it's something that's going to take place eschatologically, where Israel's going to be brought back as a nation by the Lord's leadership. And then in chapter 38, we did this last week, there's a battle. So if this is in chronological order, in chapter 37, you've got a restoration. It's the restoration that all of the prophets have talked about. 38, you've got this great battle of Gog, the battle of Gog, we'll just say. Gog invades Israel and is wiped out. Israel is occupying the land. They've got to clean up the mess. They're going to have days, months of cleaning up. They're going to use the weapons that were brought in by Gog for 7 years for fuel. And that makes you think, oh, it must have happened at the beginning of the tribulation. That's a consideration. But as we go through this, it seems like this is talking pretty clearly about a nation that has been restored, that has been brought in. So we've got to consider, is this taking place at the end of the 70th week? And this battle of Gog then takes place even after the Lord has somehow returned and is setting up His kingdom. I'm going to show you something in Daniel chapter 12, because we're going to Daniel next week and drawing all the prophecies out of Daniel so we can look at those. And again, really all we're doing is just looking, starting in Genesis, looking at all of the prophecies, the eschatological prophecies, and seeing what information is there. Not necessarily putting it all together yet, but just looking at the information. In chapter 39, then, we begin... And that's the next chapter. That's talking about the destruction of Gog. And then 40 is where we're going to start looking at this next page right here. It's just a line drawing that I did. It's in my Bible. That I just took a copy of the page. Just again, we're not going in great detail, but it's amazing. This is 38 and 39 would be here. But beginning in chapter 40, we start looking at the land and the people and the culture of what it seems to be the kingdom age. Of what is the land is being divided up, and it's the fullness. It's the fullness of the Abrahamic covenant. The land is being given to Israel. It's divided up. There's a place for the priest. And let's take a look at it. And again, it would be, unless we're going to actually sit down and study this out. Now, do you guys have a picture like this in your Bible, like this? This is in my NIV study Bible. It's got a little temple. The temple's actually drawn in it. And it's called Ezekiel's temple. You've got the original tabernacle, then you got David's tent or David's tabernacle, then you've got Solomon's temple that was built, and then after that it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nehemiah comes back, and Zerubbabel comes back, and they begin building the temple. It's called Zerubbabel's temple. It was smaller, not as near as glorious as Solomon's temple, and it started deteriorating between 400 BC until the time of Herod, and Herod came in, and they were keeping it up and running, but it was small. And Herod talked to the priests and convinced them, and they were kind of hesitant, and he made some kind of a deal with them. They could follow their rituals, they could do the stone cutting, and he would finance the building of a more glorious temple. And they took Zerubbabel's temple down piece by piece, a little bit at a time, and replaced it. So they thought maybe it was a trap by Herod. I'll take your temple down and rebuild it. Well, they take it down, and we ran out of finances. We can't rebuild. So they negotiated, and what ended up resulting in was the New Testament temple, the glorious temple that Jesus was in. The disciples talked about how glorious it was, and then Jesus says there won't be one stone left upon another. They were building that in like 19 BC, and they continued up until even just, up until the time of the destruction, 66 AD, they were still just finalizing, because they had all the woodwork to do and all the decoration to do. So it was up and running, and it was glorious in 30 AD, but it wasn't even fully built, the whole Temple Mount complex. So that would be what we'd call Herod's temple. So you've got Solomon's temple, you've got Zerubbabel's temple that was built after the return from exile, and then you've got Herod replacing Zerubbabel's temple, which is the glorious temple of the New Testament that everybody talks about that was destroyed by the Romans. Now this is the next temple. This is Ezekiel's temple, the kingdom temple. It's only been seen in a vision, but the details, again, are so great that you can actually draw a picture of it. You can draw a diagram of it because they're measuring it, telling you how big it is. We're in that age where Jesus says there won't be one stone left upon another, and the courts will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the end. So we're in that age between 70 AD when the temple was burnt and the restoration when the Gentiles are going to be trampling on the Temple Mount. And so all these things, what's going to take place on the Temple Mount, is going to be occupied by Gentiles until the time of the eschatological events begin to transpire, which seem to be when one of the Gentiles, the Antichrist, gives them permission, the Jews permission, to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount, and that is beginning an eschatological sign. That is not this temple. That would be the rebuilding of the tribulation temple, or the end time temple, the temple that the Antichrist is going to take over. So you understand, we've got a series. We've got we got Solomon's temple, Zerubbabel's temple that was replaced by the New Testament, the second temple, and then you're going to have some kind of tribulation temple that was going to be replaced by this. So you may have, if you call it Solomon's 1, Zerubbabel 2, Herod 3, Tribulation 4, and then this one 5. You may say you've got 5 temples. A lot of times they just call it the first temple is Solomon, the first temple. The second temple is Herod's temple, which was actually a replacement of Zerubbabel's. Don't count the Tribulation temple because not sure what that is. And then the third temple would be considered this temple right here in Ezekiel. Now, that just to throw this in and make it personal, that tribulation temple, again, they're ready to build the temple. They're not going to be building this temple, I don't think, but they have the Temple Institute today set up in Jerusalem. We visited it, we went through it, and they've got all the parts. They've got the candle stands, they've got the priestly garments, they've got all the incense burners. They've got a stone altar that is ready to be set on the Temple Mount right now. I was in the front row during one of the presentations, and they had me come up and had me hold. They took off off the candle stand, one of the lamps, and had me hold the lamp. So potentially, if this is going to become the tribulation temple, I've held in my hand one of the bowls, the lamps, that is sitting on the candle stand that's going to go in the temple. I was holding it, and it's like we couldn't take pictures otherwise. Tony, take a picture. And again, if that's the case, maybe. It may not happen that way, but they're prepared. They're not thinking tribulation. They're not thinking Antichrist. They're thinking we're going to get, as soon as we get a chance, we're going to the temple. In fact, the altar, they said, it's a stone altar. It's a temporary altar. But if for some reason, some kind of, they even said, if some kind of peace agreement was reached, we could offer the daily sacrifices this evening. I mean, they're talking to us at noon, 1 o'clock, whatever. We're ready. What you need is a forklift, lift it up, take it up there, set it down. We're offering sacrifices today. So they're ready to start sacrificing, this afternoon. Now, just like, Zerubbabel's temple, Herod's temple, they continue to build up around it, but it's ready to go into operation right now. That's what their plan is. Now, they're not thinking tribulation, Antichrist. They're thinking to restore the offerings and the sacrifices. If that all plays out, again, these are all pieces. We just got to watch and wait. But this temple, it begins in chapter 40 again. In the 25th year, and this is the year 573, it says, in the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the fall of the city, on that very day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and He took me there in visions of God. He took me to the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain on whose south side, we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but notice right here the dating. This is the year, we can say clearly, this works out to be in the year 573 BC. Jerusalem fell in 586, and this would be 573, which would be the year. So they're well into the captivity. They're in the 13th, 14th year of the captivity, and it says it right there. And so, Jerusalem has been destroyed. It's in rubble. But now Ezekiel is taken back in a vision to a very high mountain on whose south side were some buildings that looked like a city. He took me there, and I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. He was standing in the gateway with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. The man said to me, Son of man, he's talking to Ezekiel, look with your eyes and hear with your ears and pay attention to everything I'm going to show you, for that is why you have been brought here. Tell the house of Israel everything you see. So they're being told about this future temple. That's what's going to be measured, and then the city. It's going to be seen by Ezekiel. He's seen in a vision. This is not literally happening because it doesn't exist yet. In Ezekiel's day, not even in our day, we would assume. But it's to show Israel, who's at this time been in captivity. The temple's been destroyed for 14 years, that God has a plan. And all the prophets that have talked about destruction, but always promised restoration. This is now them getting a chance to see what the future holds for them. And the angel, that's the guy that's meeting him there, gives him a linen cord, and that would be, we could say that's a tape measure, that's a roll of cord that they stretch out, and a measuring rod, that would be, like a yardstick or something like a stick. So he's given two measuring, there's no doubt about it, those are two measuring tools. One to stretch out for a longer distance, and one to measure maybe across, a room or a doorway or something. And what he's going to do is he's going to take these and measure this temple that he's looking at. I saw a wall completely surrounding the temple area. Okay, that would be around the complex. The length of the measuring rod in the man's hand was 6 long cubits, each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. Again, notice right now you get into how long is a cubit. That's been described. Like Noah, they give measurements of Noah's Ark in cubits, and you got the cubit of the days of the kings, and now you got the cubit now of the official cubit of the kings. Now it's been influenced by the Babylonians. And so notice what it says. Was 6 cubits, each of which is a cubit and a handbreadth. He measured the wall, and it was 1 measuring rod thick and 1 rod high. So however long this rod is, that's how tall and wide the surrounding wall was. And we can just go through here and read all the details. Look in verse 8. And again, we're not studying this. I'm just showing you this information that is here. Then he measured the portico in verse 8 of the gateway. It was 8 cubits deep, and its jambs were 2 cubits thick. And again, the jambs are going to be this part, like this part of the door, was 2 cubits thick. Now, one of the things that's interesting is we can see one of the New Testament temple door jambs on the south wall. You can still see the remains right by the double gate. There's the triple gate, the jamb. You can still see the cut stone. Most of it's been broken away, but you can still see one of the base stones and the jamb coming up in the decoration that would have led in. Jesus, the apostles, people in the New Testament would have walked right through that jamb into the temple. There's many gates going around the temple that you can still access or even see, including a stairway. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff from the New Testament time period. It's all mostly underground and below the surface of the temple, but there's ways of getting up to the temple. So Jesus' words were fulfilled. There won't be one stone left upon another, but actually the foundation, all the the retaining wall and stuff, and the gates that come in there, there's pieces of that left as you come up to it. But it's been straight bare. But this again talking about the future temple. Inside the east gate were 3 alcoves on each side, and 3 had the same measurements. And just continues to talk about this, and it's interesting. That's where you get, I don't have a picture there for you of this temple. That's what I've got in this Bible. You can Google it, you can look at it, and it will show you the measurements. Basically, it's pretty much a square. You can see this is just the NIV Study Bible, and they just put all the measurements together. Then you got the temple in the middle. You've got the wall going around. It's a square. Like Solomon's colonnade, where the church used to meet, it was on the New Testament temple that would go around, and there's still signs of that colonnade left, including some pockets that were cut in the stone right next to Fort Antonia, right below it, where the beams would go across. They'd sit on pillars on this side. The beams would stretch across and sit in the pockets. I've got a couple pictures of the pockets where the beams were cut in, and it'd go all the way around the temple of Jesus' time, a portico with pillar columns, and you could step in there, and it'd be like a walkway that you could walk all the way around with a covering over it. And it says that the church would meet in Solomon's colonnade. They would meet there in the area between the columns in the shaded area. That's where they would meet. This now is the colonnade showing right here going around this millennial temple. It's similar, showing that on this diagram. I'm going into chapter 40, verse 17. There it describes the outer court. That's the outer court where before you got into closer to the temple area. It describes then the north gate, and he measures the length of the north gate. Then verse 24, the south gate. The gates to the inner court. Now you're in the outer court. You're going to go through the gates into the inner court. This may be considered what the beautiful gate, when the old man in the axe was healed at the beautiful gate. It would have been the gate that possibly went from the outer court into the Jewish court, into the court of the Jewish men could go into this area here. Gentiles could be in the outer court, but there's a place where you could not cross, and you had to be Jewish to go inside. And that's where the layman was begging, and that's where Peter healed him and went leaping and jumping and praising God in the book of Acts. That would be similar to these gates right here in verse 28. Verse 38, a room with a doorway was by the portico in each of the inner gateways where the burnt offerings were washed. See, again, you got to remember, this is confusing, and it's worth saying, whoa, wait a minute. You don't have to accept this. And you should ask the question, because Hebrews makes it very clear, and we know this as Protestants, that Jesus Christ was the final sacrifice. It's done. It's complete. We don't repeat it. We don't need animal sacrifices. He is the sacrificial lamb. And this comes under a lot of, these chapters come under some criticism from people that it appears they're rebuilding the temple, and they're not just going to say, this is what we used to do, this is where we used to offer animal sacrifices, this is where we used to pour out the drink offerings, this is where we used to bring the grain offerings, this is where the priests used to store their clothes. It looks like this thing is up and running full speed, including having animal sacrifices. And so it's like, whoa, you mean, and again, I'm just teaching what it says. It appears this temple is going to be functioning, or at least the image here is that we have a functioning temple that's going to be in the future. Now, is this a vision that's not going to really be fulfilled? It's symbolic. You can go that way if you want to. The way I understand it, again, and all this, you should say, well, let me think about it, let me research it. I think there's going to be all the rituals are going to be done, but they're not going to be, in a sense, valuable, atoning for sin, but they're going to be a memorial sacrifice. This is what the king will be sitting in the temple. I mean, where's the throne of God going to be? Where will Jesus be sitting? He's going to be in the temple. He will be sitting in here. And everything going on around him is going to be reflecting on what he did for mankind to be able to have this relationship where he's dwelling with man on earth. And these sacrifices would then, obviously, according to our New Testament doctrine, it would be supported in the book of Hebrews. The sacrifices are nothing more than a memorial of reminding us, never forget what this man did for us, this eternal God who became a man. He's not just, God. He's not just the cool guy with all kinds of power. He's the guy who went to the pits of hell, paid for sacrifices, died on the cross, just like these animals are representing. And all those animal sacrifices, there's a teaching lesson with each one of them, what are they atoning for. That's Leviticus, and it all has a lesson to it. And so that, for me, I have no trouble with that. You may, and I may be wrong. But it's no different, in a sense, than the Lord's Supper. I mean, when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, we have the bread and the cup. We're not sacrificing the Lord again. We're not, it depends on your view. You've got the Catholic view, and then you've got some of the real presence view. You get in some of the Reformed churches where there's an actual presence of Christ there, more than just, the Spirit being there amongst the community. Or you have what I would accept, you have a memorial service. You have, like Jesus, do this in remembrance of me. He didn't say do this to keep yourself free of sin. He didn't say do this and cleanse yourself of sin. He said do this in remembrance of me. You're cleansed of sin through Jesus Christ. Why do we have not the sacrifice, that the Catholics would have Mass, which is a re-sacrificing, a reworking of the sacrifice of Christ. Some of the Protestants, like if you go Reform, some of them, not speaking for them, but they practice a real presence. The real presence, you're actually participating in the presence of Christ. Where I'm thinking what you're doing is it's a teaching tool. You're recalling what Jesus did on the cross. You don't need more Jesus. You've got, like Colossians says, you've got the fullness of deity. The deity lives in bodily form in Christ, and you've been given fullness in Christ. You don't need the bread. You don't need the cup to get more Jesus. You don't need the cup to wash away your sins. It's been what you can't get any more justified. You can't get any more saved. You can't get any more Jesus. But you can renew your mind and come to a better understanding of who you are in Christ and what Christ has done. And thus, Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. So you don't lose the meaning of who Jesus Christ is. So that's what I think the Lord's Supper is. And for me, I can see why we've got a huge temple set up to all the sacrifice, because in the Old Testament they pointed towards Christ, that He's going to do this. In the kingdom age, they're still going to be done pointing back to what He did to get us to this position. I have no trouble with that, but that doesn't mean you can struggle with it and have a different opinion. But anyway, point 38 or verse 38: a room with a doorway was by the portico, in each of the inner gateways were the burnt offerings, where the burnt offerings were washed. In the portico of the gateway were 2 tables on each side, on which the burnt offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings were slaughtered. So what you've got, he's walking into a room where there's tables where the sacrifices are being there. So there's priests working, there are Levites working, slaughtering animals, and then they're being washed over here on this table, and then being prepared to be taken to be burnt. And then if you follow the priest, some of it would be eaten by the priest in the presence of the Lord. Some of it would be sacrificed, burnt as a burnt offering. So I mean, it appears this thing is functioning. There's places to slaughter, there's places to wash, there's places to burn. We're gonna see, if we keep reading here, some more interesting things. Anyway, then in verse 44, the rooms for the priests outside the inner gate within the inner court were 2 rooms, one at the side of the north gate facing south, and another at the side of the south gate and facing north. He said to me, the room facing south is for the priests who have charge of the temple, and the room facing north is for the priests who have charge of the altar. So if you're in charge of the temple, your dressing room is over here, and you keep your supplies in here. If you're in charge of the altar, this is where you keep your stuff. You keep your supplies over here. Again, one is the temple. You are in the presence of the Lord. The other, you are in the presence of the sacrifices. And so there's 2 different rooms. These are the sons of Zadok, who are the only Levites who may draw near to the Lord to minister before Him. So there's some that are going to be going into the temple, into His presence, and are ministering to Him, either bringing Him food, eating food in His presence, taking care of the things in the inner court where the Lord is actually dwelling. And I'm reading the text to you. It's like, well, that sounds really weird. Okay, well, what do you think it's going to be like? And this is what Ezekiel's describing. Then he measured the court. It was square, 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide, and the altar was in front of the temple. That would make sense. The temple itself, down in verse 48, he brought me to the portico of the temple and measured the jambs of the portico. They were 5 cubits wide. That's on either side. That's 8 feet 9 inches. The width of their entrance was 14 cubits. That's 24 feet 6 inches. And its projecting walls were 3 cubits wide on either side. That's 5 feet 3 inches. The portico was 20 cubits wide. That's 35 feet. And 12, that's 21 feet, cubits from the front to the back. It was reached by a flight of stairs, and there were pillars on each side. This is the entrance. The stairs going up with pillars, and you're entering the portico that goes into the temple. You got this, talk about a grand government building. That's where you're walking up to, this glorious government building. What's on the inside? Well, we're eventually going to get to the presence of the Lord where He's dwelling. Now we're talking about the temple. Verse 41, or chapter 41. We've described the temple, and we've rushed through it, of course. Then the man brought me to the outer sanctuary. So now you've walked, you're standing in the steps looking up into the temple. Now he's going to take you back out to the outer sanctuary, turning facing east, measuring the jambs. The width of the jambs was 6 cubits on each side. He also measured the outer sanctuary, goes all the way through. He went through the inner sanctuary. Look in verse 4. And he measured the length of the inner sanctuary, that'd be the most holy place. It was 20 cubits, and its width was 20 cubits across the end of the outer sanctuary. He said to me, this is the most holy place. So he's standing in the most holy place, measuring it. It's 20 cubits square. Then he measured the wall of the temple, tells you how wide that is. Verse 8, I saw the temple had a raised base all around it, forming a foundation on the side rooms. Describes that. Verse 12, the building facing the temple court on the west side was 70 cubits wide. That's 122 feet and 6 inches. Then he measured the temple. It was 100 cubits long. That's 175 feet. Verse 15, then he measured the length of the building facing the courtyard at the rear of the temple, including its galleries on each side. It was 100 cubits. It's 175 feet again. Watch this. Go down into let's go to verse 17. Verse got to go to verse 15. I can't go very far. I've got to catch up into it. Then he measured the length of the building facing the courtyard at the rear of the temple, including the galleries on each side. It was 100 cubits, or 175 feet. The outer sanctuary and the inner sanctuary and the portico facing the court, as well as the thresholds and the narrow windows and the galleries around the three of them, everything beyond and including the threshold was covered with wood. The floor, the wall, up to the windows, and the windows were covered. In the space above the outside of the entrance to the inner sanctuary, and on the walls at regular intervals all around the inner and outer sanctuary, were carved cherubim and palm trees, similar to Solomon's temple. So it was built out of block, stone block, but then there was panels of wood laid on it, just like we might have woodworking. But they had carved, cherubim, and then the pomegranates trees. I'm looking for my place. I looked up. Or palm trees. Palm trees alternated with the cherubim. And the cherubim, now what is a cherubim? It's an angel. But what does a cherubim look like? We get a description at the beginning of the book of the cherubim with 4 faces, like a square head with 4 different faces on it apparently. 6 wings, or 4 wings, and 2 of them were like wheels. Wheel within a wheel, like a gyroscope. But then also when you go back and look at the seraphim or cherubim, sometimes if you get into Assyria or Babylon, those are those giant bulls with wings that are standing out in the outer courts. Those are also cherubim. So when we consider cherubim, we've got the biblical definition, we've got the cultural definition, and sometimes there's some kind of a mix in between, because what they're describing was also similar to what they would have in their courtyards. Even the Sphinx in Egypt could be a representation of what they thought a cherubim looked like one of the protectors of the god. So you've got your biblical description. You also have the way the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and others. And we find these images throughout the ancient Middle East. But anyway, here it says, the palm trees alternated with the cherubim. Each cherub had 2 faces, the face of a man towards the palm tree on one side, and the face of a lion towards the palm tree on the other. The ox and the eagle face are not mentioned here, that we saw earlier in the chapter, and we see in Revelation. They were carved all around the whole temple. So the temple is full of these palm trees and these cherubs, or cherubim. From the floor to the area above the entrance, cherubim and palm trees were carved on the wall in the outer sanctuary. The outer sanctuary had a rectangular door frame. And again, I can keep reading here, giving more details. Chapter 42, verse 1. These are rooms for the priests. And the man led me northward into the outer court towards, took me to the rooms opposite the temple courtyard. These are places where the priests are going to have their stuff and their supplies. Look in verse 11. Then he said to me, the north and south rooms facing the temple courtyard are the priest rooms, where the priests who approach the Lord will eat the most holy offering. So these offerings that they're slaughtering and washing and burning or cooking, they're also eating, and they're eating in the presence of the Lord. There they will put the most holy offerings, the grain offerings and the sin offerings and the guilt offerings, for the place is holy. Once the priests enter the holy precincts, they are not to go into the outer court until they leave behind the garments. They can't take their garments out of the area because they're holy, they're special. They are to put on other clothes before they go near the places that are for the people. Now, I should say this, because as we consider this, if this is the kingdom age, you're saying, well, what are the sin offerings? What is all this? It can be representative, but we also can understand it this way, that there's going to be not just resurrected people in the kingdom, there's going to be people that live through the tribulation. And they're not going to go through death, they're not going to go through a rapture, they're not going to go through a resurrection yet. They're going to live into the millennium with their physical bodies, it appears, and we'll see this as we go through other verses. And they'll live into, they could be alive today. They'll see, the results of this election. They'll see the results of what happens in 20 years if they're still alive. Then maybe the end times comes. They see the Antichrist. They hide. Maybe somehow they got confused for a while and didn't know where to go. And then suddenly they see Christ. They accept Christ. They aren't killed by the Antichrist. They reject the mark of the beast, and they survive into the millennium. That would also include the Jews. The Jews, the 144,000 who go into hiding, who have the seal of God, they're not resurrected. They're going to live right into the millennium, potentially, with their physical bodies, which means they haven't been resurrected or glorified, which means they will have children, and they and their children will continue to have a sin nature into the millennium. Do you understand the difference? When we are glorified, when we die and receive our glorified bodies, we're saved spiritually, justified in the past. We're being saved now in time. How our souls are being saved. We're being sanctified. But at the resurrection, we're glorified. We're saved physically. And we will be forever in that condition. If people live out of this age and live right into the millennium, not everybody's got to die before you cross over. Some of them are going to just live right. If it's on this planet, they're just going to live right into the kingdom age. Just like, Daniel was with the Babylonian Empire. They were overrun by the Persians, and now guess what? I work for the Persians. And he was like, here one day, this is where I worked in my office, and we got the Babylonian flag and images and picture of Nebuchadnezzar on the wall. Cyrus comes in, Darius comes in, sets up, they threw all the Babylonian stuff up, converted it all, put the picture of Cyrus up. I work for Cyrus, here's the emperor now. And now he was a Babylonian, now he's working for the Persians. And the same thing, you're working in this age, and now all of a sudden you're in the new kingdom age, and Jesus is on the throne. And so a lot of this could be considering, because there is, as you know, at the end of the millennium, there's going to be a revolt. What has taken place is it appears the curse is going to be removed from the earth, and Satan is going to be locked up. We can see that in other verses. But there will be people that will live in and they'll still have a sin nature. Not affected by the curse on the earth, because Jesus is going to remove that curse. Not affected by Satan, because he's locked up. But if they still have a sin nature. And so a lot of this can be, in a sense, work for them. That they're going to have to continue to, be recognizing their sin and confessing sin. Not that these sacrifices would pay for those sins, but they would be a recognition. Just like we, at the Lord's Supper, it says, Paul says very clearly, let each of us examine himself before he eats. Meaning, you examining yourself, saying, yes, I found sin, I confess this sin, doesn't mean drinking this cup or eating the bread is going to wash you of it. It means confessing your sin, you've come back in the fellowship. And the same thing, this can be nothing more than just an identification of sin, a continuous recognition of sin, and keeping people cleansed. Nonetheless, keep that in mind. But that's what's taking place right here. It seems very active. Now we've seen the whole temple, we've seen the priesthood, we've seen the rooms, we've seen the sacrifices. I mean, there's much more detail. But now chapter 43. Then the man, this is the angel leading Ezekiel through, they gave him the measuring equipment. Then the man brought me to the gate facing east. So if this is the front of the temple right here, he'd come down those steps and would have walked across the outer court, or the court of the front of the temple, and out through the what we'd say the beautiful gate, down into the outer court, and now he's facing the gate in the wall that goes east. Today, it's still there in the mount, the New Testament gate, the east gate, is probably built on top of by a modern gate. Not a modern, it was built in the 1500s. By Solomon the Great when he was fortifying Jerusalem. But under there, just like you can see other gates, if we would excavate, and we can't, they won't allow us to. They buried a bunch of Muslim bodies on it, so we can't excavate there. But if you go up to the north wall of the city of Jerusalem today, there is the big Damascus gate, a glorious Damascus gate. But they did excavate underneath that modern gate. And when they excavated down underneath it, they found the New Testament gate and the pavement that was put in by Agrippa II. And even after that, 135, when it was renamed Aelia Capitolia by the Romans, they renamed Jerusalem, that was all down there. And there's a gate. In fact, I got pictures standing by that went down there. It's closed today. You can't get down there. It's all blocked off today. You can't get down to it today. But I was fortunate. I got down there, saw the stones of the first century, saw the carvings of the gates from the first century. It was all down there underneath today's glorious Damascus gate. Now today, facing east, there's a gate, it's called the Golden Gate, the Eastern Gate. It's blocked shut because of this chapter right here. Because of this chapter right here, it's blocked shut. In the Byzantine days, when the Christians used to rule Jerusalem, they would open it up once a year and have a celebration come through, and then they block it shut. Since the Byzantine Empire lost Jerusalem to the Muslims, they keep that block shut because they don't want any political figure coming in that gate claiming to be fulfilling this chapter. So it's still there. It's built in the 1500s, or it's been remodeled in the 1500s. If we continue down, and there's been 2 times people have gotten underneath that gate. One time in the 70s, James Fleming, He was going to the Jerusalem University, taking a class at Jerusalem University, and he was a student there. And it was a rainy, muddy night, and he was out taking pictures, probably sneaking around, kind of like, I might try to do. But it had washed away some dirt, and he had actually slipped down in, because there was graves there. And so eventually it washed away, and he fell into a grave, and he could see, and he got a couple pictures of the top of an arch. It's an arch like this, stones of an archway of a gate. And then there's bones laying in front of it. And that gate, now they've had that picture, the gate proves that under the eastern gate there is a gate. And then recently, I'd have to look it up again, but more recently, another guy went over there and did some work, and got some other pictures, and confirmed what James Fleming saw, that there is a gate underneath it. And as they look at it, they estimate that it's probably the New Testament gate, and there may be stones. It may actually be part of Solomon's eastern gate that's still underneath there. Now again, they put concrete over it, they put Muslim graves over it, it's a holy place, don't go there. But nonetheless, that's what we're talking about right here. It may have not, I'm not saying any of that, what I just said, has anything to do with this chapter, except that is there's a modern eastern gate that's blocked shut. The Byzantines have used it. The Muslims are afraid of some Messiah figure coming in and causing some kind of political upheaval. But underneath it, at the right location, is either Zerubbabel's gate, remains of Herod's gate, possibly even Solomon's gates that is still down there, or remains of it. So nonetheless, that's what we're looking at right here. The man brought me to the gate facing east. Now he's standing right there. And I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. So the glory of the God of Israel, that is called the Shekinah glory. It's called His presence. I would consider that to be the Messiah coming back. It's the throne, the chariot of God, probably. And when you say coming from the east, you can think east, far away from the land of Jordan, coming across the Jordan River through the Judean wilderness. You can consider that. Or you can consider east, the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley, and there's the Mount of Olives. And if you go to Zechariah, Jesus' feet, or the Messiah's feet, are going to come down, and His feet will touch the Mount of Olives. Jesus ascended into heaven. Guess where? He went out there, stood at the right place, and ascended into heaven and disappeared in the clouds. And those clouds may be a key. It was a cloudy day, and He just went up and disappeared in the clouds. And that might be what it means. But the Son of Man, Daniel will see the Son of Man. It comes in clouds. Jesus even says, you will see the Son of Man coming in clouds of glory. And then He goes out and then ascends in the clouds. So there may be a connection there. Just understand, clouds are used several times. But now you've got, it says, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. Which would mean at least He's coming over the Mount of Olives. If not from the Mount of Olives. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters. There you go, it's the Messiah. And the land was radiant with His glory. Now what He is doing right here is actually fulfilling what He acted out on Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday was a reenactment of this, or a pre-act of Him, of coming in and everyone receiving Him, thinking, oh, the Messiah is here. And then He says, no, it's not. And you're going to kill me. And they killed Him. This is what He was acting out. But keep that in mind. His voice was roar. Okay, the vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when He came to destroy the city, and like the vision I had seen by the Kiba River. I fell face down. Now, do you understand what he saw at the Kiba River? That's how the book begins. He sees a storm blowing in. Then he sees a sea of glass, and he sees some kind of cherub. There's lightning, and then there's cherubim, and then he can see on it there's a throne, and as it gets clear, he sees there's a man that's fire from the loins up and fire from the loins down, and that man sitting on the throne says, Son of Man. He calls Ezekiel Son of Man. And he says, that's exactly what I just saw. Like, what does he see? What does this mean? He just saw the chariot that he saw in chapter 1. He sees it coming. And in chapter, I think it's chapter 11, he sees that same chariot leaving the temple, coming to the threshold, and then flying away to Babylon, because the Lord leaves the temple in Jerusalem in Ezekiel's day before the fall. And so now this is the Lord returning to the temple. anyway, it says, the glory of the Lord entered, okay, the vision I was, verse 3, the vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, chapter 11, or chapter 10, and like the vision I had seen by the Kiva River at the beginning of the book, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. So the Lord goes through the eastern gate, and the Lord walks into his temple and is seated in his heavenly glory in the temple. So now, so far, all you saw was an empty temple, but now you've just had, just like Moses had the Lord's presence come into the tabernacle, Solomon saw the Lord's presence come into the temple, Ezekiel saw it leave in Ezekiel chapter 10, now he sees the Lord enter his temple again. So we've got three accounts, the Lord entering the tabernacle, the Lord entering Solomon's temple, and now the Lord entering the millennial temple. While the man was standing beside me, I heard someone speaking to me from inside the temple. Okay, now who do you think speaking to him from inside the temple? He said, Son of Man. That's exactly what the Lord calls him at the beginning of the book. Anytime the Lord speaks to Ezekiel, he calls him Son of Man, which is, I think, something to be seriously considered when Jesus in Matthew 24 says, then you will see the sign of the Son of Man. Now, the sign of the Son of Man is the Lord returning, but at the same time, the sign of the Son of Man, what did the Son of Man see? Who is the Son of Man? In this book, the Son of Man is Ezekiel, and the Son of Man, Ezekiel, keeps seeing this chariot of glory with the Lord on it, and now he goes in and he says, Son of Man. So when he says, it's at least worth considering, the sign of the Son of Man like lightning from east to the west, what are you talking about? He's talking, I think, clearly about the chariot of God appearing at some point, somehow, in history on his return to this place right here. And here we pick it up right here. So again, sign of the Son of Man can mean the sign of Jesus, or it can mean the sign that the Son of Man saw. But either way, it's the same thing. Son of Man, this is the place of my throne, and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. The house of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their prostitution and the lifeless idols of their kings at the high places, when they place their threshold next to my threshold and their doorposts beside my doorpost. And it goes on and talks about all the sins of the past and how it's going to be new now. Verse 10, Son of Man, describe the temple to the people of Israel. So that's Ezekiel. Keep writing about what I'm showing you, that they may be ashamed of their sins. This is what I have planned for them, and look at what you've done in your day. Let them consider the plan, and if they are ashamed. See, so this vision is supposed to give them hope, but it's also give them shame of how bad they are and how in need of a Savior they are, so that this is their future. So again, there's hope, but there's also this embarrassment, this shame of what have we done? If they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangements, its exits, its entrances, its whole design, and its regulations and laws. Write these down before them so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all of its regulations. This is the law of the temple. All the surrounding area on the top of the mountain will be most holy. Such is the law of the temple. And so now we've got this place. And again, Ezekiel began this vision by being brought to Jerusalem and seeing a high mountain, and he's seeing it from the south. And coming up the south side of the mountain is what looks like a city. And now he's being brought in, and he's been measuring this temple. And now he's in this city, on this mountain, speaking with the Lord who's seated in the temple. And that's chapter 43. Now, the next going on, chapter 43, verse 13, the altar is described. You can read all about the altar. Chapter 44, then the man brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east. So now he's going to go back out to the gate facing east. And it was shut. Why is it shut? Because there's no need to use it anymore. The Lord said to me, this gate is to remain shut. This is the Lord speaking. It must not be open. No one may enter through it. It is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. He's come in. Now watch this next verse. We've seen this before. The prince himself is the only one who may sit inside the gateway to eat in the presence of the Lord. He is to enter by the way of the portico of the gateway and go out the same way. So there's one individual named the prince who's going to be the prince ruling the Israelites under King Jesus, who's ruling the world. In other words, it's like the king of Israel who's serving Israel under the king of the world, Jesus. And it says that in Zechariah 2, he'll be the king of the whole earth. So Jesus is returning as Israel's Savior. He's going to restore them, but he's actually returning to rule the nations. And then under him is going to be the prince, which we could call the king of Israel, or the prince of Israel. And we're going to see as we read through this, that this prince is David. Again, and that's what? David? Well, if we're talking about people being resurrected in this eternal state, or in this kingdom age, David is going to be resurrected, and is going to be the one who's going to be the prince. And it's brought up later. So just keep that in mind. This prince is the only one that can eat in the gate. He can go into the presence, sit in the portico, the Lord's on the throne, David's in his presence, and they can share a meal. Then the man brought me out, verse 4, then the man brought me by way of the north gate to the front of the temple. I looked and saw the glory of the Lord filling the temple of the Lord, and I fell face down. And again, just like Solomon saw it, Moses saw it, now you're seeing the temple being filled with the glory. The Lord said to me, Son of man, look carefully, listen closely, and give attention to everything I tell you concerning all the regulations regarding the temple of the Lord. Give attention to the entrances of the temple, all the exits, all the details. And then it goes on and gives you more details, talks about the Levites, the sons of Zadok. In verse 23 of chapter 44, it says, verse 23, it says, they talk about the priests. They are to teach my people the difference between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the unclean and the clean. So the priest's role there is still to teach. The divisions of the land. Now chapter 45. This gets into now this little chart I've given you. Again, this is something I drew in my Bible. And what you've got here in this square, and again, this is just a crazy amount of information, okay? And I understand that. But what you're going to have here, the square that you see, it's going to be a 7-mile square. And this is out of the details of the book of Ezekiel. This is a 3-mile division here, a 3-mile division here. So this is 3, this is 1 mile, this is 3, this is 7, like this. And the sanctuary, the temple, is sitting right here. This is the area, this is the 7-mile area around the temple. We're going to end up seeing in chapter 48, verse 13, this is the Levites portion. This is where the Levites will live and farm. This is the city. This is divided into thirds, and this is the city south of the mountain. This is the city's land. This is the garden. We'll just say it's the land. I'll just say the garden, or probably better, the fields for the city. So it's a green city. It's a green city. They went green. This is where they're going to raise their crops, and this is the city. And over here, this is city land for the city workers. This is where the workers will live. So this is like the city. This is the residence. This is the field. This is the area. And the priest will live in this area here. And that's what's going to be described here in chapter 45. Is that correct? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Again, I've changed these measurements to miles, but you can see them right here. Chapter 45, verse 1. When you allot the land as an inheritance, you are to present, remember they're told it's going to be your inheritance. Well, now they're dividing the land up. You are to present to the Lord a portion of the land as a sacred district, 25 cubits long and 20,000 cubits wide. The entire area will be holy of this section, 500 cubits square, and this is basically, and you can do your own work on that. And basically what I've told you there, that's what you see taking place right there up to chapter 45. Going down to verse 13. In verse 13, now you're going to have, this is the special gift you are to offer, a 6th ephah. You've got holy days. You're going to go through the holy days. Here's the prince again. Look at verse 16 of chapter 45. All the people of the land will participate in this special gift for use of the prince in Israel. It will be the duty of the prince to provide the burnt offering, grain offerings. So there's the princes doing these things there. Chapter 46. This is what the sovereign Lord says. The gate of the inner court facing east is to be shut on the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath day, on the day of the new moon, it is to be open. The prince is to enter from the outside through the portico of the gateway and stand by the gatepost. The priest will offer sacrifices. Then in verse 4 again, the burnt offering, the prince brings to the Lord on the Sabbath day is to be 6 male lambs. So the prince is supposed to, if it's David, he's supposed to bring 6 male lambs and a ram as an offering. They continue to talk about the prince in verse 16. This is what the sovereign Lord says. If the prince makes a gift from his inheritance to one of his sons, it is also to be property. He goes through and talks about that. There's many things here. I can keep reading. Now we come to chapter 47. The man brought me back to the entrance of the temple. So he brings him back. Here's the entrance of the temple. And so here's where the steps are. And here's the portico, the temple court, or the pillars. This would be the outer court over here. And here would be the eastern gate right here as you come into there. Now he brings him out. It says, chapter 47. The man brought me back, chapter 47 verse 1. The man, the angel, brought me back, Ezekiel, to the entrance of the temple, which would be right here. And I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east, for the temple faced east. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. So here's what happens right here. Coming out of under the temple here is water starting to flow out here, and then it's flowing down. It's flowing out of the temple, from under the temple. There's a spring of water underneath this temple. And there is wells underneath the temple. That has nothing to do with it, but there is reservoirs of water. In fact, down in this, if this was like the temple court today, and this is much larger, but the temple court today, or the remains of it, going along the western wall, like this is way like 7 miles, way bigger. But I went along this western wall, and when you get down into here, there's still a pool of water down here, a reservoir that is still, it's got a ceiling on it and stuff. That the Romans built up after the temple fell. But there's water still there today. It's called something about sparrows. It's called, the Hebrew word for sparrows is what it's called. I can't remember. It's in my book. But nonetheless, here's water flowing out from the threshold right here. And the threshold means under the door, under the frame of the door. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out through the north gate and led me around to the outside to the court facing east. So he goes out the north gate, or up here somehow, and goes around to look over here. And the water was flowing from the south side. The water's still flowing over here. As the man went eastward with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits, that's 1,500 feet, and then led me through the water that was ankle deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits, another 1,500 feet, and led me through water that was knee deep. So they're walking out into this river that's forming, and as they're walking, it's just about 1,500 feet of ankle deep. By the time you get there, it's starting to get thigh deep. Well, it just continues, you know the story. It goes on, verse 3, he measured off another 1,000, but now the river I could not cross because the water has risen and was deep enough to swim in, a river that no one could cross. He asked me, Son of man, do you see this? Then he led me back to the bank of the river. Now, this river, it's like he's going off, you go like 4,000 cubits, or 1,500 times 4, 3, 6. You're getting far away here, and then you've got a river flowing right here. It's coming out of here. The spring is just pouring out water. Then he led me back. I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. That's verse 7. He said to me, this water flows toward, are you ready for this? This water flows towards the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah where it enters the sea. In other words, this is flowing down into the Kidron Valley, out the Kidron Valley to the south, downward the valley of Jehoshaphat, where there will be a judgment that take place before this whole event takes place. And that hits the ravines or the wadis that flow down into the Dead Sea. Everything's downhill from Jerusalem. It's downhill, goes down to the Jordan Valley. And it flows into the Dead Sea, and watch this now, into the sea. When it empties into the sea, the water there becomes fresh. Because it's the Dead Sea, it's the lowest place on earth today. It's full of salt. Nothing lives there. Even birds don't fly over. There's nothing there to fish. There's no fish. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. Fishermen will stand along the shore from En-Gedi. We've been to En-Gedi. And in Englam, there will be places for spreading nets. Fish will be of the many kinds, watch this, like the fish of the Great Sea. What's the Great Sea? It's the Mediterranean Sea, because we're going to see this water also, as it flows this way, it's going to split off and flow this way too to the Mediterranean Sea. So that you've got, this temple is not just on a mountain, it's got lakefront property that you could go to the Mediterranean Sea or you go right to the Dead Sea. And when the Dead Sea fills up with water, the reason it just stops there, it's the lowest place it evaporates. Well, if you've got fresh water flowing into this fast, it's going to go right out the bottom, right down to the Gulf of Aqaba, and you've got a connection to the south going into the Red Sea. So right here, you can go to the Mediterranean Sea, you can go down to the Dead Sea, right to the Dead Sea, all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba. It's like, holy smokes, you talk about good travel arrangements, you talk about good property, and nonetheless, you go to there today, it's like, it's kind of like an old place. There's a good future place. If you want to buy something, that's all you're going to want to invest in right there. Okay, the boundaries of the land. Again, the next chapter, 47, the rest of 47 and 48, that's going to give you the boundaries of the land, and you can see right here, I'll just point at it right here, that's this map of Israel. You can see this map right here, this little square, is sitting right there in the middle of this map. That's that little square right there. And then Prince David's land goes from here, I didn't read this part, but from here, this 7-mile swath of land from here, all the way to the coast is David's property. Not a bad gig for eternity, or for the kingdom. And then there's this part over here, the part going this way belongs to the prince's port, right here, going this way. Because this is where David's going to have his own fleet of ships for going here, because he's going to be doing naval traveling. That's what it says right there. It's like, this is like some kind of fictional game that he's playing here. But anyway, you can see, the land is divided going north of this, starting at Dan, Asher, Naphtali. It's all measured off, like just going straight across, just like David's land goes straight across. Their division of the land is just straight across. They're not like those little crazy land divisions they've got in Joshua's day. They're just sweep straight across the land of Israel, just chunks going right straight across. And that's what you see in the rest of the chapter. And then, and you can see that as the book ends in chapter 48. You've got verse 24, Simeon will have border of territory. Then Issachar, Zebulun, verse 27, Gad. And then it says, it talks about the gates of the city. And then, of course, the last line of the book, it says, the name of the city from that time on will be, the Lord is there. And that is the name, whatever that is in Hebrew, that is the name of the city. The Lord is there, because He is sitting right here. He is ruling and reigning the world from this location. We're going to find out in other chapters, other verses, the nations are streaming to get information from this person. And if they follow him, their nations prosper. If they bring sacrifices, we can see this in Zechariah chapter 14, they bring sacrifices, the Gentile nations bring sacrifices, they'll make sure they get rain and they continue to prosper. If they decide, and they will, it is amazing, there will be some nations decide, no, we don't want to do this anymore. We want some other form of government. And they'll try to rebel against him. They won't bring their sacrifices. They'll have false media published about him. And there'll be, memes about how bad he is. And he'll go, I ain't going to send you any rain. You just wait till you just give you a famine. You want to see global warming? You got it. And they'll all just starve. You ready to bring them sacrifices? Yeah, that's in Zechariah 14. They'll, okay. Thank you very much. And then, because remember that some of them will still have a sin nature, and they're having children, and they're multiplying and growing. In 1,000 years, the world will be populated with people that have to be convinced that He is the King, He is God, and they still got a sin nature. The devil's locked up, the curse is off the earth, He just controls it. He's the one who put the curse here, He can send it on your land anytime He wants to. And there'll be eventually, when Satan's released at the end of 1,000 years, we see this in other places, they'll lead a whole multitude, will be led astray, and will come against Him and try to overthrow King Jesus. And then, of course, that's when it says fire comes out of heaven. So how that all plays out, I wanted to get into it, and we'll have to get into this sometime next. Well, in fact, we're going to the book of Daniel. I wanted to get into Daniel chapter 12, because we talked about Armageddon last year, or the Battle of Gog and Magog, and if that was Armageddon. In Daniel, I'm going to tell you this, and then I'm going to quit. And this is free. But we talk about the 3.5 years. This is real clear in the book of Daniel. 3.5 years, which is 360 days a year. We figure that, 30 days a month. That's 1,260 days. It says that the abomination will be set aside after 1,290 days. So there's a 30-day period right there. What takes place in there? That could be some kind of wars and battles that are being fought. So there could be a lot of war going on in those 30 days. And then it talks about blessed the one who reaches 1,335 days. So there's another 40 days right here. And this is where a general assumption is this is the wars and battles, which would include possibly Armageddon, possibly the Battle of Gog and Magog. I'm not sure. And then right here, after those wars are won, there's a 40-day period of judgments and clean up. Because you're just coming out of the tribulation, you're going to have to clean up after all these battles. And a 40-day turnaround time is a pretty good job to turn the earth around and clean up. But then it says, blessed is the one who reaches 1,335 days. And that would seem to be the day that we kick off the millennium and the kingdom age. So that's just, that's something that's coming up in Daniel that we'll see. That kind of, when you talk about a 7-year period, you've got 7 years, but then you've also got this 30 days that something takes place, and then you've got another 40 days, and you're blessed if you make it. So it seems like the wars and stuff takes place, the rebellions take place for a 30-day period, and that's put to an end. And then there's judgments, and blessed are you if you make it to the 1,330. That means you made it through the judgment. If you remember, Jesus told the parable in chapter 25 of Matthew, when the king comes and is seated in his glory, he brings all the nations to him and judges between the nations. And sends some of them in outer darkness, and some of them he says, welcome to my kingdom. So this is all taking place in those verses. That's Daniel tying these events with some time periods into Jesus stories and parables and into Revelation. So there we go. I'm done. If you have any questions, please let me know when I get done praying, and we'll take a listen to it. Father, we do thank you for your truth. We thank you for your word. We ask that we again would receive it and accept it as you intend it to be, and not twist it to match our own desires. But we'd allow the word to minister to our hearts, to purify our souls, to sanctify us, and help us live a life that is pleasing to you at this time in history. We do look forward to these days and look forward to your soon return. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions? Okay, it's all clear. I know we're rushing through, but isn't that amazing stuff? I mean, it's just, And now, again, do we spiritualize it and say, well, this is talking about, it seems, we're talking about measuring stuff. We're talking about the actual land. We're talking about the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, or the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking about the salt water in the Dead Sea. So it's kind of hard to say, well, is this heaven? It's like, it seems like Jesus is going to come back, land on the Mount of Olives, and set this all up. It's really, it's beyond understanding. It's beyond. What's
Your
that?
phone is this close to dying.
Okay. Anyway, it's for me. I can read it, but as you think about this is more detail than I can even fathom. So, and Tony, what's our snacks tonight?
Coffee cake.
I wanted a coffee cake yesterday for church, but she didn't get time, so she made it tonight. Thought since we were leaving, going to a new place, we'd have we had church in the parking lot yesterday, so I thought coffee cake. If I had to make you sit in the parking lot, bring you coffee cake. So we did. So we brought it tonight. I must just stop. Yes, sir.
Well, I've got a footnote in my Bible, on that very last verse of chapter 48, where it says the Lord is there. It gives the Hebrew words to go along with it.
However you pronounce it, I'm going to go, oh, okay. I'm not going to say, oh, you say that like.
Yahweh Shema.
Okay.
S-H-A-M-M-A-H.
Okay. Yahweh Shema.
Yeah.
So the Lord, and that the Lord, Yahweh, is there. That's kind of, it's a typical name. It's a good name. It makes sense. And that's what's the name of the city. You're not going to call it, like when the Romans took it, they called it was Jerusalem. They changed it to Aliyah Capitoliyah. Well, now when the Lord takes, he's going to change it to another name, which means, the Lord is there. If you have any questions, I'm done. I'm just standing here waiting. There's no bell. There's no bell going to ring, children. You don't have to do that.